Hello everyone, and welcome to Crimes of Passion. Today, we bring you a heartbreaking yet compelling story of love, betrayal, and a desperate fight for freedom. This story takes us to a small village in Gujarat, India, where Sonali, a young woman with dreams and hopes, faced unimaginable challenges. Her journey began with a love story but took a dark turn when she was forced into a marriage that changed her life forever. Imagine being caught in a situation where your choices are taken away, and every moment feels like a fight for survival. That was Sonali's reality. This story is not just about her struggles but also about the strength of the human spirit and the devastating consequences of oppression. Before we delve into the details, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Now, let's begin. Sonali was born and raised in Rajur, a small farming village in Gujarat. Life in her family was simple but tough. Sonali's family lived in a modest, thatched roof home surrounded by sprawling fields of wheat and mustard. Her mornings began before sunrise, with the rhythmic sound of grinding wheat into flour and the scent of wood fire smoke filling the air. Sonali's hands were calloused from years of farm work, yet her spirit remained gentle. She carried the weight of her family's struggles with quiet strength, often offering a warm smile despite her hardships. They relied on seasonal harvests for survival, and luxuries like education were beyond their reach. Sonali had to leave school early to help her parents with farm work. Despite these hardships, Sonali stood out. Her radiant smile and warm, kind nature made her the heart of the village. She was admired not only for her beauty but also for her resilience and modesty. Among those who admired her was Omar, a hard-working young man from the same village. Omar and Sonali's love story was one of quiet sincerity. They met during their daily routines working in the fields or at the village market. Omar was a kind soul, with hands roughened by labor but a heart full of dreams. He often spoke of leaving the village one day to find work in the city, promising Sonali a life free from toil. They would talk late into the night, sitting under a canopy of stars, dreaming of a future where their love could thrive without constraints. Over time, their connection grew deeper. They shared their dreams and consoled each other through life's difficulties. Their love was pure, but poverty and societal pressures soon threatened to pull them apart. The news of Sonali's arranged marriage shattered their world. Omar's usually cheerful demeanor darkened, his eyes heavy with unspoken sorrow. Sonali's heart ached as she listened to her parents explain the decision. They spoke of stability, of lifting the family out of poverty, but to Sonali, it felt like a betrayal. Her life, her dreams, her love all reduced to a transaction. On the night before her wedding, Sonali slipped out of her home and walked to the fields where she and Omar had spent countless nights. The cool breeze carried with it the scent of damp earth and wildflowers, a bittersweet reminder of the love they were about to lose. When she reached the clearing, Omar was waiting, his shoulders slumped, and his eyes filled with unshed tears. They sat in silence for what felt like hours, the weight of unspoken words pressing down on them. Finally, Sonali broke the silence, her voice trembling as she apologized for something beyond her control. Omar held her hand, his grip firm yet tender, as if trying to etch the memory of her touch into his soul. They parted with a final embrace, a moment of profound sorrow and unspoken promises. After her wedding, Sonali's life changed drastically. Her husband, Sakin, was unable to fulfill the role of a partner, and the household was ruled by her father-in-law, Shankar. Shankar's overbearing nature made it clear that Sonali's role was not that of a wife but of a servant to the family. At first, Shankar's behavior seemed overbearing but manageable. However, his true intentions soon became evident. He began exerting his control over Sonali in ways that were both humiliating and oppressive. Her days were filled with endless chores, and her nights were haunted by his presence. Her cries for help were met with silence from the rest of the family, who were too afraid to oppose Shankar's authority. Sonali's early days in the household were marked by a grueling routine. She woke before dawn to prepare tea for the family, followed by hours of cleaning, cooking, and washing clothes. The physical toll was immense, but the emotional strain was even more punishing. Every task was accompanied by sharp comments from Shankar, who scrutinized her every move with a critical eye. Over time, Shankar began imposing increasingly degrading duties on Sonali. What started as subtle belittlement turned into overt humiliation. He would call her into the living room during family gatherings and order her to perform menial tasks in front of everyone, making it clear that she was there to serve, not to belong. His favorite command was to have her crawl to fetch items, claiming it was a tradition to show respect to elders. The first time Sonali was forced to crawl across the floor, she hesitated, her face burning with shame. But Shankar's gaze, cold and commanding, left her no choice. The room fell silent, the other family members averting their eyes, unwilling to intervene. As Sonali obeyed, the sound of Shankar's mocking laughter echoed in her ears, a cruel reminder of her powerless position. Sonali quickly realized that she had no allies in the household. Sakin, her husband, was indifferent to her plight, often retreating to his own world and avoiding conflict at all costs. Deepa, her mother-in-law, was a shadow of a woman, worn down by years of Shankar's dominance. Though Deepa's eyes sometimes betrayed a flicker of pity, she remained silent, too afraid to stand up to her husband. The servants in the house, though witnesses to Shankar's cruelty, were equally helpless. Bound by their positions, they dared not speak out. Sonali felt trapped in an environment where everyone seemed complicit in her suffering through their silence. Shankar's demands escalated with time. He began treating Sonali as less than human, assigning her roles that stripped away her dignity. One particularly humiliating task involved her serving meals on all fours while Shankar made lewd remarks about her appearance. He justified his actions with twisted logic, claiming it was her duty to honor the family by serving them in every way possible. Sonali's protests were ignored, and any sign of defiance was met with harsh reprimands or threats. Shankar's authority was absolute, and his actions were normalized within the household. The other family members, bound by fear, continued to turn a blind eye. The relentless abuse took a toll on Sonali's health. Her hands, once strong from years of farm work, became raw and blistered from constant scrubbing and cleaning. Her back ached from hours spent bending over, and her weight began to drop as she often skipped meals to keep up with Shankar's demands. Emotionally, Sonali felt herself unraveling. The once vibrant and hopeful young woman was now a shadow of her former self. She found solace only in fleeting moments of solitude, where she could cry silently and remember a time when her life was her own. One evening, Shankar's cruelty reached new heights. He summoned Sonali to the center of the living room and threw a leash at her feet. With a sneer, he ordered her to wear it, claiming it was a new custom he wanted to implement. The demand was met with gasps from the servants, but no one dared to voice their objection. Sonali's heart pounded as she stared at the leash, her mind racing. Every fiber of her being screamed in protest, but Shankar's unyielding gaze left her paralyzed. Slowly, she picked up the leash, her hands trembling. As she complied, Shankar clapped his hands, laughing cruelly as he paraded her around the room. The humiliation was unbearable, yet Sonali bore it in silence, her tears falling onto the cold marble floor. Despite her despair, Sonali began to resist in small, subtle ways. She would deliberately take longer to complete tasks, knowing it would irritate Shankar. She whispered prayers under her breath, finding strength in her faith. These small acts of defiance became her lifeline, a way to reclaim a sliver of control in an otherwise powerless existence. At night, Sonali often retreated to the small corner of the house that served as her room. There, she clung to memories of her past life, replaying moments with Omar in her mind. These recollections became her sanctuary, a source of hope that kept her from succumbing completely to despair. Months of torment led Sonali to a critical decision: she had to escape. She could no longer endure Shankar's cruelty and the degrading life he imposed on her. Late at night, when the household was quiet, Sonali began to formulate a plan. She would reach out to Omar, the one person she believed could help her. Sonali wrote a letter, detailing the horrors she had faced and pleading for Omar's assistance. She poured her heart into the letter, her words a mix of desperation and hope. Folding it carefully, she slipped it to a servant she trusted, begging them to deliver it to Omar. Desperation hung heavy in the air as Sonali awaited Omar's response. Each passing day felt like an eternity, her heart pounding at every sound, fearing Shankar's discovery of her plan. When Omar finally replied, his words were both a balm and a burden. He promised to help, vowing to protect her at any cost, but the enormity of their task loomed large over them. The night of the escape arrived, cloaked in an oppressive stillness. Sonali's hands trembled as she prepared, stuffing a small bundle with a few belongings. The sound of her own breathing filled her ears as she crept through the darkened halls of the house, every creak of the floorboards sending waves of panic through her. At the arranged spot near the back gate, Omar waited, his face a mask of determination and fear. As they prepared to flee, a sound shattered the silence. Shankar, his suspicions aroused by Sonali's recent behavior, had followed her. His shadow loomed large as he stepped into the dimly lit kitchen, his expression a mixture of anger and triumph. He barked orders for Sonali to return to her room, his voice dripping with menace. When she hesitated, his tone grew sharper, the threat unmistakable. Omar, who had been hiding nearby, stepped forward, his presence an act of defiance. The two men locked eyes, the tension crackling like a storm. Shankar's fury erupted as he lunged toward Sonali, his intent clear. In that moment, years of pent-up rage and desperation surged through Omar. Grabbing a heavy stick from the corner, he swung it with all his strength, the impact resounding through the kitchen. Shankar crumpled to the ground, the force of the blow leaving him motionless. The room fell deathly quiet as the weight of what had just occurred sank in. Sonali stared in shock, her mind racing with conflicting emotions of relief and terror. Omar dropped the stick, his hands trembling as he reached for her. "We have to go," he whispered, his voice thick with urgency. Together, they fled into the night, the echoes of their footsteps swallowed by the darkness. The world outside the estate was vast and unknown, but for the first time in months, Sonali felt a glimmer of freedom. The night air was crisp, carrying with it a mix of hope and fear as Sonali and Omar moved quickly through the winding paths of the village. The moonlight provided just enough illumination to navigate, but every sound, a distant bark, the rustling of leaves, felt amplified, as though the entire world was aware of their escape. Omar led the way, his familiarity with the village routes their only advantage. They avoided the main roads, choosing instead to weave through dense fields and narrow alleys. The adrenaline coursing through their veins kept them moving, but the weight of their actions hung heavily over them. Every step felt like a gamble, with freedom on one side and capture on the other. As they neared the outskirts of the village, Sonali's energy began to wane. The months of abuse had left her physically weak, and the pace of their escape was taking its toll. Omar noticed her faltering and paused, his eyes scanning their surroundings for a safe place to rest. "Just a little further," he whispered, his voice a mix of encouragement and desperation. He took her hand, helping her navigate the uneven terrain. Despite her exhaustion, Sonali drew strength from his presence, her determination reigniting with every step. The journey was not without close calls. At one point, they heard voices in the distance, the distinct sound of men shouting. Fear gripped them as they crouched low in a thicket, holding their breath as the voices grew closer. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours before the commotion moved away, leaving them shaken but undeterred. Dawn broke, casting a golden hue over the landscape as Sonali and Omar finally reached a secluded grove. Exhausted but alive, they collapsed beneath the shade of a tree. The gravity of their actions began to sink in, their breaths heavy with both relief and fear. Shankar was gone, but his death was not the end of their troubles, it was only the beginning. The household awoke to chaos. Shankar's lifeless body was discovered in the kitchen, and panic quickly spread. Deepa, his wife, was overcome with shock, while Sakin, oblivious to the full extent of his father's actions, demanded answers. The servants, terrified of being implicated, shared only fragments of what they had witnessed, creating a storm of accusations and confusion. Word of Shankar's death reached the village, drawing the attention of local authorities. Investigators arrived, their questions sharp and unrelenting. The trail of evidence, Sonali's disappearance, the conflict in the kitchen, and Omar's involvement painted a grim picture. It did not take long for the authorities to identify the culprits. Meanwhile, Sonali and Omar remained in hiding, their temporary refuge a fragile sanctuary. They shared whispered conversations, trying to piece together a plan. Omar spoke of finding work in a distant city, where they could start anew, while Sonali grappled with the weight of her guilt. She had escaped her tormentor, but at a cost that left her soul heavy with grief. Their reprieve was short-lived. The authorities, relentless in their pursuit, closed in on their location. One fateful evening, the grove that had sheltered them was surrounded. Armed officers called out, demanding their surrender. With no escape, Omar and Sonali stepped forward, their hands raised in resignation. As they were led away, Sonali's mind raced with memories of her journey, the love she had lost, the torment she had endured, and the desperate act that had set her free. She knew the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but for the first time in her life, she felt the faint stirrings of hope. Perhaps, even in the face of judgment, there was a chance for redemption. As they were escorted to the station, Sonali couldn't shake the conflicting emotions swirling within her. On one hand, there was relief that the nightmare of Shankar's household was over, on the other, there was the crushing weight of what they had done. She knew their story was more than just a crime, it was a desperate fight for freedom. During her first interrogation, Sonali broke down. Through tears, she recounted every detail of her torment, the humiliations, the leash, and the years of silent suffering. Her voice trembled as she spoke of the night Omar struck Shankar, framing it not as an act of malice but one born of desperation and love. Her testimony painted a vivid picture of the psychological and physical abuse she had endured, leaving the room heavy with unease. The investigators listened, their expressions a mix of skepticism and sympathy. Sonali's words highlighted the systemic failure of those around her, family members who turned a blind eye, a community that prioritized tradition over justice, and a legal system ill-equipped to protect the vulnerable. Unlike Sonali, Omar remained stoic during his questioning. He accepted full responsibility for Shankar's death, explaining that his actions were unplanned and driven by an uncontrollable need to protect Sonali. He described the moment in the kitchen, the fear in Sonali's eyes, Shankar's towering figure, and the overwhelming rage that took over. Omar's voice faltered as he admitted to the killing, but his resolve was clear. He did not regret saving Sonali, even if it meant sacrificing his freedom. The trial drew widespread attention. Journalists flocked to cover the case, framing it as a dramatic tale of love, betrayal, and survival. Public opinion was divided. Some saw Omar and Sonali as victims of a cruel system, while others condemned them as criminals who had taken the law into their own hands. In court, Sonali's defense team worked tirelessly to shift the narrative. They presented evidence of her abuse, calling upon servants and neighbors who had witnessed Shankar's behavior. Their testimonies painted a grim picture of life in the household, corroborating Sonali's claims of degradation and cruelty. The defense argued that Sonali's actions were not those of a criminal but a victim pushed to the brink. They emphasized her lack of options, highlighting the cultural and societal barriers that had trapped her in an abusive environment. Emotional letters from her parents, expressing regret for forcing her into the marriage, added weight to the argument. On the other side, the prosecution painted a starkly different picture. They acknowledged the abuse but insisted that it did not justify murder. Shankar's death, they argued, was a deliberate act of violence, and the law could not condone such behavior, regardless of the circumstances. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the court reached its verdict. Omar was sentenced to 12 years in prison for manslaughter, his confession, and the circumstances surrounding the act mitigating a harsher sentence. The judge acknowledged the moral complexity of the case, noting that Omar's actions, while unlawful, stemmed from a place of desperation and protection. Sonali, meanwhile, faced a lighter sentence. The court recognized her as a victim of prolonged abuse and sentenced her to 5 years in prison for her complicity in the escape and her failure to report the incident. The ruling was met with mixed reactions. Some saw it as a compassionate acknowledgement of her suffering, others believed it was too lenient. Prison became a paradox for Sonali, both a punishment and a reprieve. For the first time in years, she felt free from the suffocating presence of Shankar and the relentless demands of his household. Within the prison walls, she found moments of solace, reflecting on the choices that had led her there. Sonali spent her days participating in workshops and counseling sessions. She shared her story with other inmates, many of whom had faced similar struggles. These interactions became a source of healing, as she realized she was not alone in her experiences. The camaraderie among the women offered her a sense of belonging she had long been denied. Omar, housed in a separate facility, remained steadfast in his feelings for Sonali. Through letters, they exchanged words of hope and resilience, their bond unbroken despite the physical distance. Omar often wrote about the future, painting pictures of a life they could build together once their sentences were over. Sonali's case sparked conversations across the country. Activists and organizations used her story to highlight the plight of women trapped in abusive marriages. Debates erupted about the need for stronger protections and the role of cultural norms in perpetuating cycles of abuse. While progress was slow, Sonali's story became a symbol of resilience, inspiring others to speak out. Within the prison, Sonali began writing about her experiences. Her words, raw and unfiltered, resonated with those who read them. With the help of a prison counselor, she compiled her writings into a manuscript, hoping to shed light on the hidden struggles faced by countless women. As the years passed, Sonali's release date drew closer. Her time in prison had changed her. She was no longer the broken woman who had entered its gates. She emerged stronger, her spirit tempered by hardship but not defeated. When the day of her release came, Sonali stepped into the sunlight, a free woman. Waiting for her was Omar, who would finish his sentence 3 years later. Together, they resolved to build a life far removed from the shadows of their past. Their story, though marked by pain and loss, became one of survival and redemption, a testament to the strength of the human spirit. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment your thoughts below. Stay safe, and join us next time for more stories on crimes of passion.